Welcome, everyone. I'm David Suissa. I'm here with Elana Mizell from the Tikvah Fund, and we're delighted to sponsor this very important conversation and debate on the judicial reforms in Israel that has caused a tremendous amount of controversy. And we're also delighted to have two terrific representatives of each side of the debate. We have Member of Parliament Simcha Rothman from the Religious Zionist Party, who's the chair of the Constitution, Law, and Justice Committee, and a former member of the Judicial Selection Committee. We also have Professor Yaniv Rosner, who's an associate professor and vice dean at the Harry Radziner Law School and co-director of the Rubenstein Center for Constitutional Challenges at Roth-man University. This is an issue that has gotten a lot of polarized coverage from one side or the other. And what we're hoping today is in one conversation, one place, to try to represent both sides of the debate as fairly as possible. We're also delighted to have as our moderator, Jewish Journal columnist Shmuel Rosner from Israel, who will explain the format of the debate, and we'll continue the conversation. And you can see the full bios of the panelists at the bottom of the chat room. And now I'll hand it off to my partner, Elana Mizell from the Tikvah Fund.
Well, thank you very much, David, for your friendship and for this opportunity to partner. I'm the founder and chair of the Israel Law and Liberty Forum, which is a Tikvah Fund Israel initiative that's aiming at cultivating leadership, discussion, and debate within Israel's immensely influential legal community. And specifically, we focus on issues that are at the heart of the current debate, such as judicial restraint and the separation of powers. So this is a truly significant constitutional moment for Israel. And I want to thank the speakers and the moderator, the Jewish Journal, and especially you for taking time out of your Sunday to engage in a conversation that is really so important to the Jewish state and to the Jewish people. If you want to ask questions for the second part of the debate, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will be sure to relay as many as possible to Mr. Rosner for the second part of the event. So with that, Shmuel, please take it away.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for having me as a moderator. I'll thank Professor Rosner first, but then I'll thank M.K. Rothman, who's probably the busiest man in Israel at the moment, and the fact that he was willing and ready to be available for us for an all hour on this Sunday evening in Israel is remarkable. And thank you, Simcha, for putting this time for us to have you. Just so we will all be on the same page, let me remind our viewers and listeners that this is a very dramatic moment in Israel. Tomorrow, we are going to have the first set of votes in the Knesset, the initial votes in the Knesset on some parts of the legislative reform. This is dramatic both for the supporters of the reform and for the opponents. We expect tomorrow to be a dramatic day at the Knesset, at the parliament. We expect probably many thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Israelis protesting the votes tomorrow. And we also hear that negotiations or conversations between supporters and opponents of the reform are taking place at the president's house. I heard on the radio just on my way from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv today that M.K. Rothman was at the president's house today. I'm sure you'll be willing to share with us some of the details about the conversations that you're having there. With that, the format of the debate, we have 7 minutes for M.K. Rothman to present the case for why judicial reform is essential and urgent for Israel to have. Then we have Professor Rosner, 7-minute response, and then 3 minutes for each twice to respond to one another. And the second half of the hour will be more of a freestyle discussion between us. I have a fairly easy job as a moderator because you truly have today two of the most eloquent, knowledgeable speakers available on such topic. So my main job will be not to interfere. With that, MK Rothman, the floor is yours. 7 minutes for your initial remarks.
Thank you very much. And first, I want to thank everyone who was involved in getting this evening in Israel, noon in the US. Tonight, the Tikvah Fund and Law and Liberty Forum and the Jewish Journal and really all the people that were involved. I think it's very, very important. And I think that getting to know the facts or even the debate is knowledge is power for that matter, because we hear here in Israel and definitely outside of Israel so many rumors and some of them, of course, fake news. But I'm here to try to explain in short what's it all about. So with that, let's start. First, I think to make sure that we're all on the same page. Israel does not have a constitution. Some would say that's the problem. Some would say that's a good thing, doesn't matter. Israel does not have a constitution. And the fact that Israel without a constitution having an issue with the judicial review, meaning the power of the court to cancel laws based on the constitution, which again does not exist, may explain a lot of the confusion of what's going on here. So if we don't have a constitution based on what the court should ever have the power to cancel laws, why is it an issue? The answer is basic laws. Israel passed over the years a lot of basic laws, which for many years was not really understood what exactly makes them basic. What is there some extra power to the word basic law? And the court decided in 1995 that once there is a basic law, there is a problem with the Knesset enacting a law against it. That started what was called then maybe the some called it the judicial coup, some called it the judicial revolution, the constitutional revolution, many names to the same event, taking power from the legislator to the courts. Now, the Knesset did not really know what to do with it for many, many years, and there was never a final saying by the Knesset. The court can cancel law, cannot, in what terms, in every issue, in any case, every basic law, a lot of confusion. And before the elections, my party and a lot of other parties in the coalition said, we have to set it straight. Now, it's not an issue of for constitutional experts, because in Israel, we cannot do, we as elected officials, we cannot do anything without reforming the judicial system. We cannot fight terror because the court blocks a lot of measures that the government wants to take against terror. The court blocks it, like no other country in the world. We cannot help fight the rising housing prices because the Knesset and the government created some laws trying to and decisions in order to deal with those issues, and the court canceled them. So the rising housing prices in Israel is also, for some part, court-made. We cannot make sure that into Israeli Knesset, we won't have legislators, Knesset members, using their parliamentarian immunity to direct missiles by the Hezbollah, like Azmi Bashara did, or to use power or force against soldiers, like Hanin Zoabi did, or smuggle phones into the prisons to terrorists so they can coordinate terrorist attacks, like Bassem Ratas did. We are standing defenseless against them because we're trying to disqualify them based on Chapter 7a of the Basic Law of the Knesset, and the court just disregards it. We cannot do a lot of other important issues for the Jewish identity, for the safety, for the governability, fight crime, rising crime rates, without reforming the courts. So that's the reason all the parties in the coalition decided not only to reform the judicial system, but also to do it with urgency, because there are a lot of challenges the state of Israel is facing, and it's very hard for us to try to face them when the courts is having his own agenda and is canceling laws and canceling government decisions based on jurisprudence like no other country. And when I'm saying no other country, I'm saying that there is no other country in the world where the court created the constitution, decided what is written in there, and is canceling laws based on his own decisions. There is no other country, definitely not democratic country in the world, where the court is self-perpetuating. They appoint themselves, they have a veto who will get into the courts. The sitting judges today can decide who will get in. There is no other court that deals with almost any issue directly in the Supreme Court without an appeal process. You can go directly to the Supreme Court and challenge every government decision without showing the need of standing. You don't need to show that you have some personal interest in the matter. And I can go on about there are no other countries in the world where the judiciary and its branch within the government, the chief legal advisor, has so much power. That's why we try to reform it. We try to make sure that the court cannot cancel basic laws. We want that Israeli judiciary will be elected by the public like any other democratic country in the world. We want to make sure that the court that cancel laws, doing it with all the 15 judges sitting on the case, not like today, any judge can do whatever he wants. We want to make sure that reasonability, which is very vague, will not be a reason to cancel a decision by an elected official. Again, like no other country in the world. There are many details in the reform, but to go all over them, and you will need way more than 7 minutes. But the main aspect is we want in Israel that the judiciary, that the judges will judge, the Knesset will legislate, and the executive will rule. That, like no every other country with separation of powers and democracy.
Professor Rosner.
Thank you very much, Shmuel. Thank you very much, everyone, for this very kind invitation. So I want to talk about my opposition to this reform, and calling it a reform is an understatement of the millennium, because what is now on the table is basically a set of various constitutional reforms that aim to give the government absolute powers. Now, this is crucial. This is not about the court. This is not about the Supreme Court. This is about politicians wanting to govern without any limitations or restrictions. The reform is not needed. Since 1992, since the enactment of basic human dignity, our Supreme Court has invalidated or struck down 22 provisions of laws out of 4,000 laws that were enacted in this period. If you examine the percentage of petitions that were accepted against the government in the last decade or so, we're talking about 3%. So it is not about the court. It is about the politicians who want to govern, again, without any limitations. Now, this is crucial because if you examine the Israeli constitutional structure vis-a-vis other countries, in all other democracies in the world, there are various mechanisms that aim to make sure that political power is not concentrated in one body. 2 houses in parliament, a presidential system with veto power for presidents, a regional electoral system, a federal system where you have a vertical separation of power. Or think about all the European countries that are members to the European Convention on Human Rights and subordinated to the European Court of Human Rights. Israel is the only democracy in the world without any such mechanisms to make sure that there are some checks on political power. The only checks we have are the judiciary and the legal advisory. And these are precisely those bodies that are now will be severely undermined because of these so-called reforms, because these reforms will basically do three things. They will give the government absolute powers in legislation. The government will be able to legislate any law whatsoever, regardless of how violative it is of fundamental rights. It will be able to control the legal advisory, to pick their own legal advisors, and to select the judges. Nowadays, there's a mutual veto. It is true that the judges have veto, but also the politicians. There can be no appointments to the Supreme Court without agreement of the politicians. What the change is supposed to do is to make sure that the coalition, and only the coalition, not like the US where you have interbranches, only the coalition itself will be able to appoint judges, not only to the Supreme Court, but to all courts, even the lower courts. Now, the Israeli system, unlike other countries, we need to understand our Supreme Court mostly deals with appeals, civil appeals, criminal appeals. It needs to be a professional court. And that is why I fear of this reform. Shmuel, do I have some more time or do I need to finish?
No, you have 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes, great. So I want to say maybe a word about the process. This is the most dramatic constitutional change in the country's history. And instead of making sure that this dramatic change is being brought in a considerate, deep and rigorous process, where you think about the implications, when you hear all the experts, but really listen to them, where you consider the unintended consequences that might appear. We're seeing a constitutional blitz without any justification. There is no real need to do things quickly. The only reasons to make it quickly is because MK Simcha Rothman thinks that he doesn't have enough time in the coalition, so he wants to make things as quickly as possible. If you want to make a proper constitutional change, you need to pause, you need to think, you need to consider, you need to study, and I'm sure that we can bring a good reform to the Israeli system. This is not what's on the table. Thank you.
MK Rothman, 3 minutes.
Okay, so I want to make sure that people, one of the issues I think that for American audience might be the strangest is the override mechanism. The override mechanism that is part of the reform saying that the Knesset can override the decision by the court if the court says that a certain law is unconstitutional. Now, for people who live in a constitutional country, it sounds strange. If it's against the Constitution, why would you let the parliament, definitely in a regular majority, override the Constitution? What good is a Constitution? Which is a fair point if you only remember that Israel does not have a Constitution, and when the court is canceling a law, is doing it based on a basic law that was passed in the Knesset by 30 Knesset members, 31. So to say that the court, you will need a supermajority to cancel an interpretation of the court of a law that was passed by 32 or 31 or 30 Knesset members does not make any constitutional sense. So, and to say that we are rushing, that's what Yaniv Oznai said, or the court cannot cancel law. Okay, it does not cancel a lot of laws. The court himself defined canceling a law in a country without a constitution as an unconventional weapon, like an atomic weapon. What would you call a country that uses an atomic bomb 5 times in 1 year? In 2017, the court has canceled 5 laws based on nothing, basically. No, it's a laws that are canceled time and again on the same issue. The court has canceled the laws regarding the illegal infiltrators, immigration policy by the government 4 times in a row in less than 5 years. You cannot have an immigration policy if the court is canceling your laws time and again and canceling policies that are well accepted in any other country. The court canceled 3 times in a row the law regarding the ultra-Orthodox draft law. Now think what you think. I have my position about the ultra-Orthodox draft law. What's good position, but the court even canceled the versions that L.L.B voted on. So even that wasn't good enough for the court in Israel. So you cannot solve this social pressing issue. You cannot solve it because whenever the Knesset gets to a solution, the court cancels it. Now, to say numbers doesn't really matter because the court many laws are not even being legislated because of the fear by the court that the court will cancel them. So to say they canceled on the 20 or 22 doesn't really show you the picture. So, and the most important thing, we're not rushing into it. The override mechanism was in the coalition agreement in 2015. Many of the current day opposition members voted for it, supported it while they were in the coalition. Now they changed their mind because they're in the opposition, but they voted for it. People from the right and from the left in Israel were supporting it. Professor Friedman, who was not a right-wing person, he was a justice minister. He called for even harsher reforms than what we are pushing now today. So to say that we are rushing into it, or that it's too extreme, or that's just not true. What I chose specifically laws that were offered by members of the opposition and supported by members of the opposition. And I gave away my ideas of how the constitution or the quasi-constitution of Israel should look like in order to get a wide agreement by the opposition and the coalition. And the fact they throw it away and say we're against it because we are in the opposition just show that if we do get to a constitutional moment, as Elana said, we need the coalition and the opposition to look on the reality and what they supported all the years and go for it, even that they are now in the opposition or in the coalition. If that will pass, if people will not look at the fact that they are now in the opposition, and if I have a ballot in the Knesset plenum and people will vote anonymously without the pressure by Aviv Rosner and other people, I think the reforms that I'm offering will get more than 90 Knesset member support based on their former actions.
Professor Rosner, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Shmuel. The override clause that was mentioned by Simcha Rothman is a red herring, because we will not get to the override clause. MK Simcha Rothman suggested that judicial review of laws will be in a full bench of 15 judges, and when all 15 judges consider a law to be unconstitutional, only then a law can be invalidated. Compare that to the US style of judicial review when you have 9 judges and 5 out of 4, right? 5 versus 4 can strike down laws. MK Rothman suggested that even if all judges, right, or let's say, according to the Minister of Justice, it's only 13 or 12 out of the 15 deem a law to be unconstitutional, even then, 61 Knesset members can override that decision. We will not even get to the override because we will simply not have any laws that will be considered unconstitutional. Now, I think this is crucial. It is crucial to understand the constitutional structure in Israel. Unlike the US, what we as Israelis have is a government that controls the Knesset. And who controls the Knesset? These are 5 or 6 politicians that control the coalition. This is the coalition leadership. And they can impose their will on the coalition through coalition discipline. So basically, through this reform, we are giving a small number of politicians absolute powers to select all the judges and to legislate any laws whatsoever without any restrictions. I do not see how this improves Israeli democracy, especially when what we see around the world is how governments use and abuse their power to undermine other democratic institutions. So if we want to think about improving Israeli democracy, I want to tell MK Simcha Rothman, pick any democratic country in the world, any democratic country, and we will take the way they appoint judges and the way they have constitutional review mechanisms, but we adopt them in entirety with its entire constitutional system, not to do cherry picking and pick only those mechanisms that give the government absolute powers without any restrictions or limitations or protection on rights.
MK Rothman.
We can talk about different countries, and we can talk about, for example, Canada, where the Prime Minister appoints judges just by himself, and until 1982 they did not have a constitution, but after that they have some kind of charter, but then they have an override mechanism with a simple majority. They don't even need 61 in our examples. But also, when people talk about the absolute power in the coalition, I have to remind you, and the other checks and balances. That's really not the situation. Let's talk about the US again, for example. You have two houses of parliament. You have the Senate and you have the House of Representatives in the Congress, right? But the government, the president, can veto any law. In Israel, the government cannot veto laws. They can impose criminal punishment based on their own regulations without getting the consent by the Congress. In Israel, you cannot do it. You cannot have any decision, any regulation with criminal punishment, even in the municipality, has to go to the Knesset for an oversight by the Constitution Committee. You cannot have like regulation or administrative state like you have in the US. The president can do executive orders basically on anything that he wants. He can move budgets, billions from side to side. In Israel, every transfer of budget go to the Knesset for approval. In Israel, the checks and balances on the government power is extremely harder than in any other countries that I know of. And just to remind everyone that watches, how strong is Israeli government? Do you remember last government? Every week it was a crisis. Will they get the majority? But okay, last government is not an example. Let's go on the government before that fell after 8 months. You know what? Let's go for the government before. There was no government before, because to form a government in Israel is extremely hard, because you have to get a coalition of many, many different people. You have to defend minority rights, right? In Israel, every minority in all the country can get his people into the Knesset and be part of the political play. In the US, if you are a Republican in New York or a Democrat in Alabama, you can just please don't go to vote, because your vote just don't count. In Israel, your vote will count, and you will get representation based on your ideological or social group. If you are a minority that is more than 3% in the population, you will have representation in the Knesset. Even less if you're going and working through the other parties. So in Israel, minorities getting a lot of more power. And if you look in the examples, what did the court do? Did the court help minorities in Israel? No. Whatever the minorities got through the Knesset, because the Knesset gives a lot of power to minorities and a lot of ways to block actions of government against them, the court took it from the minorities. The court, the defender of minorities, has zero ultra-Orthodox judges. So he will defend the minority of the ultra-Orthodox. He never does, and he never will. He have one Arab out of the 15. If it will be anything compared to their percentage in the population, they would have 3. But no, he has 1 out of the 15. Almost no Sephardic Jews, which in Israel are a large minority, and they get 1 seat in the court. Also, the women representation, terrible. And that when judges select judges. If judges would be selected by the body politics of Israel, by the Knesset, by the elected officials, by the majority, like most countries around the world. In the US, 12 out of the 15 judges were selected when the president and the Congress and the Senate were on the same party. So then we have Republican judges and Democrat judges. That's what we have. In Israel, if the right is in power, he cannot appoint judges. If the left is in power, they can appoint 61 judges in 2 hours. Why? Because the court is with them. That's not a democratic system. We have to, if the left will get power in Israel through the elections, by all means, let them appoint the judges, but let also the majority of Israel, the people who vote for the Knesset, have the ability to appoint judges, like in Canada, like in Australia, like in New Zealand, like in Denmark, like in Sweden, like in Norway, like in the US, like in any other democratic country. Why should the people in Israel should not get this vote?
Professor Rosner.
I think that's a broad interpretation of 3 minutes. I'll try to conform with this. I'm happy that MK Simcha Rothman said about women representation. If you look at the current government, there are more ministers with criminal charges than women. And we're supposed to believe that this government will appoint more women to the judiciary. or more Arab judges. The right wing has been in power since 2007 and had veto powers on who will be at the Supreme Court, and they haven't appointed any Sephardic or Mizrahi judges. It's not the fault of the court, it's the fault of the politicians. But putting that aside, what the current government is doing, it's what we call in the literature abusive borrowing. They say, oh, let's take the way judges are appointed in the US and the way legal advisors are appointed in the UK, and we'll take the Canadian override clause, and we'll take the way court is reviewing legislation in El Salvador, and we'll put this all together in the Israeli system. This is, in the literature, we call it a Frankenstein. This is what you get. You get a monster. You don't get a functioning democracy. Again, you cannot pick just or simply those mechanisms that give the government power without the restrictions, the limitations, the protection of rights. In Canada, it is true. They have an override clause since 1982. It has never been used at the federal level. It doesn't apply on all fundamental rights, for example, gender equality, precisely some of the rights that will be applied upon in Israel. In Canada, there is one of the most rigid constitutions in the world and a rigid Bill of Rights. Actually, the override clause was inserted into Canada because of the Bill of Rights. So MK Rothman, if you want an override clause, that's fine with me. Bring us a complete Bill of Rights with the right to equality, free speech, freedom of religion, and then we can discuss override. You cannot take just the override without the Bill of Rights. It doesn't make sense. And one last point about our strong parliament and the strong oversight. We have a very small parliament, 120 Knesset members, just like New Zealand with 5 million people. Take out of that, deduct from that 30 or 35 ministers and vice ministers. Deduct from that the Speaker of the House and his deputies. Take from that those chairs of the Knesset committees like Simcha Rothman, and we are leading the world in the number of committees. You are left with 74 Knesset members who are supposed to jump between 4 or 5 committees to do the legislative work and the oversight work. We have a very, very weak parliament. If there is one reform that is needed, is to make our Knesset stronger, bigger, and better. Once you do that, then we can discuss taking away powers from the court. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. I'll take my prerogative as moderator to ask the first question, and then we have, I don't know, 165 questions from the crowd, and it's getting the list is getting longer. By I think Ms. MK Rothman, you'll have to postpone the vote for tomorrow.
That's your evil plan. That's your evil plan.
Yeah, that's the evil plan of the Jewish Journal and the Tikvah Fund. They wanted you to postpone the vote. So let me ask both of you, not about the legal side, but rather about the social side of the event, of this process that we are going through. And MK Rothman, you see that there is a lot of apprehension in Israel. There is a lot of fear. There is a lot of pushback, and Israel seems to be spiraling into a crisis that is its own making. Now, is it really worth it? Is this reform necessary to the extent that it justifies such social crisis, the type of which we see right now?
First, I think that the social crisis, which also I'm not trying to minimize it, but we still need to take it into perspective. I think the social crisis at large is not about the reform. When you talk about the issues that the people are worried about, they are not worried about what bothers Professor Yeshivat. No one, I have to say, as I am deeply I deeply care about issues of constitutional law. That's my profession. I was working on it for many years. I would never think that people would go and demonstrate about words like jurisprudence. Nobody shouts it. It doesn't rhyme with anything. But people are afraid of other things, and most of them are issues that have nothing to do with the reform. People are voting if you follow about what's on the sign on the demonstration, what people say. People say that we're going to take women's right to vote. Now, really, seriously, no one talked about it. But yes, they are protesting. They say we have a woman's right to vote. In Israel, we had a prime minister, a woman prime minister, way before some democratic country had women's right to vote. Nobody is going to take it away from Israel, but people are afraid. People are talking about having a state ruled by rabbis. Again, not in the coalition agreements. I can't even start to deny all the lies that people are afraid of. And I have to remind you, Yair Lapid, while sitting prime minister on the interim period between the elections and the new government, sent a letter to municipalities in Israel and called them not to cooperate with the new government as long as Avi Maoz, one of the deputy ministers, is a deputy minister. Now, that has nothing to do with the legal reform, that really trying to create an uproar, trying to create some sort of civil war or civil distrust in the government, because he does not like who the people in the government are.
But you're in charge, so is it not your responsibility to calm the population and make them understand that this reform is good for them, and if not, maybe somewhat compromise to have something that the public can understand and tolerate?
So again, it's my responsibility not to do all of the bad things that people are thinking that we're going to do, and I'm willing to take this responsibility. I cannot convince people that calling me very, very worried that I'm going to take away women's right to vote, beside telling them that's not going to happen. Stop watching TV. So that's my advice. Stop watching TV, because when you watch TV, they tell you that we're going to take away women's right to vote, and that's a lie. Read the law and stop watching TV. Tomorrow there is a vote in the Knesset. If you will go out, there probably going to be demonstrations outside of the Knesset. I doubt it if anyone that knows that are surrounding the Knesset will know what he's protesting against. He will shout, "We, the people, we want people to decide for us without us knowing who they're choosing to be our judges." Not in the world, never. People will never demonstrate that they want secretive and corrupt way to elect judges, which is the situation today. But somehow people convince themselves, because of the irresponsibility of the opposition leader Yair Lapid, who goes around and is actually trying to make some kind of a BDS campaign against Israel. That's the only thing I can understand why he's doing it. He lost the elections and he just can't accept it. So he's spreading lies, terrible lies about Israel, that Israel will prevent people from taking outside money. What are you talking about? Israel has a free economy. What are you talking about? Elections, women's right in elections. One of his members of his party said that if we win the elections, he said it before the elections, we will make news anchor that are female cover their head. It will be a law. Really, seriously, what are you talking about? So if I need to calm people that believe those lies, it's really a fool's errand. I will tell them that one lie is not true. They say, yeah, you're not going to take away women's rights. But what about the elderly rights? No, I'm not going to take them also. No, but what about? That's the level of discourse we have about this reform. If people will read what we're trying to do, and people
Professor
will not
Rosner,
believe. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, let me turn to Professor Rosner. So it's your fault that the people are.
No, this is just unbelievable. I'm so happy that MK Simcha Rothman answered the way he did, because this goes to the core of the problem of the reform. MK Rothman says there will be no violations of rights. How or why? Because I tell you so. I don't plan to. What is this nonsense? Constitutional design is not built on trust. I do not want to trust Simcha Rothman. I do not want to trust anyone. I want to have a proper constitutional design that would prevent abuse of power. This is what we want. Israel needs to decide whether it wants to be a liberal democracy or not. I do not want to give the rights of my kids and my wife, all right, to the goodwill of Simcha Rothman or Yair Lapid or any other politicians. We need to construct our constitutional structure in a way that makes sure the decisions are applied in a cogent and proper manner, that violations of rights are for proper interests and are proportionate, like any democracy in the world. Even if Simcha Rothman is correct, and he will not violate my rights or any other people's rights, no one reassures me that the other person that will come after him will not do so. Constitutional design is not built on trust. It is built on mechanisms of checks and balances, like any other democracy in the world. This is the main point. Who reassures me that there will be no violations of LGBT rights? No one. The only organ in Israel that has promoted LGBT rights is the court. If tomorrow the coalition will enact a law that says that we will not recognize LGBT couples, there will be no one who will be able to stop it. No one. And why? Why? Because they want to control the judges? Is this a good reason? If you want to have a proper constitutional reform, you need to stop this legislation, have a proper setting that will bring advisors, bring professionals, sit for 6 months and consider what would be the proper balance to the court. You do not have a constitutional revolution the minute you do it.
Well, Professor Rosner, how would you respond to the argument that many of the proposed legislation was indeed supported by many opposition members in the past? Former
never sure. We have collected and we've published all the proposed reforms to the judicial system in the last decade, even by right-wing Knesset members. The reforms that are now on the table are the most extreme reforms in any of the elements that you would select. No one has ever imagined such a reform. No one ever, even including in the right way. This is the manipulation. This has never happened. No one has ever suggested such an extreme set of reforms. Never. And I'm a constitutional professor since 2007. I have never seen any such proposals. Never in my life.
Let me, MK Rothman, I see that you want to respond.
Yeah, I will be happy to say, member of Knesset Oded Forer, a member of the opposition, offered in the 20th Knesset that the court will not have the power to cancel laws, not in the majority of 15, not in the majority of 13, never, ever, like the situation in New Zealand again, in Holland, in the Netherlands, or in Britain. That's what he offered. He's a member of the opposition today. I offered him in the committee today. If you want, I can take away my position, which is less extreme than yours, and we will adopt yours. You're from the opposition. By all means, go for it. He said no, of course. Why would he? But to say that no one has offered it, not true. What are we offering in the way we talk about the legal advisors? There was a law like that. Again, you know what? My version, exactly my version, was passed last Knesset in the preliminary hearing. I was in the opposition last Knesset, mind you. It was passed, and 5 members of the opposition voted for it. I don't know if Yaniv Rosner noted, but that's what happened last Knesset in May 2021. If you want, I can give him the number. It was law offer number 50 on Knesset 24. If we talk about the way that basic laws will be protected, it's not only my position, it's not only my offer. That is the historical for the last 20 years. The Knesset had said it repeatedly. The legal advisor for the Knesset came to the Supreme Court and said, you do not have the authority to cancel basic laws. That's not an extreme decision. That's not an extreme offer. But what Yaniv Rosner said, that I think is very important. Yaniv Rosner is right. He said, Constitution is not about trust. You need to build the system. That's not the way to build the Constitution. It's true. We're not building a Constitution. Israel does not have a constitution for 74 years. The fact that Yaniv Rosner can gather so much anger, not because what there is in the reform, but because there isn't in the reform. I am not building a constitution, and he's angry at me for not building a constitution. I am not building a constitution because the people in Israel did not elect me to have a constitution. They elected me to bring back to the public the power that was stolen from the public and from the Knesset by the courts 30 years ago and over the course of the last 30 years, some of it by provisions that was, the ideas came from Yaniv Rosner writing. Yaniv Rosner was the one who offered that the court will be able to cancel constitutional changes, basic laws, and he was the promoters, one of the promoters of the unconstitutional constitutional change, meaning the equivalent in the US, if there will be a change in the Constitution, and the court will say, I don't like the 18th Amendment, I don't like the 19th Amendment, I think it's unconstitutional, and he will disregard it or even cancel it. He's talking about cherry picking from other countries in the world. This mechanism that the court used in a minority, Baruch Hashem, it's still a minority. But one of the judges in the Supreme Court said that the basic law that says that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people should be voided by the court because it's unconstitutional constitutional change. That's a decision by a sitting judge. He is not sitting today, he was sitting then, in the court. So if Israel cannot enact in a basic law that it is the homeland of the Jewish people because it's unconstitutional constitutional change, like the teaching of Yaniv Rosner, which was tried in India and created a terrible crisis, in Bangladesh and in Colombia, if we're talking about cherry picking from around the world. And in Israeli courts, they are playing with this. We said that canceling a law is an atomic weapon, is an unconventional weapon. What would you call a court with a country without a constitution telling the people who are in charge of writing a constitution what they can or what they can't do based on basically nothing, based on whatever the court thinks is reasonable for a basic law to be. That's the situation today in Israel. That's what we try to change. That's what we have to change.
Professor Rosner, some of the criticism was directed specifically at you. So I suggest, no, you don't want to respond to...
No, I can respond briefly. Yeah, I was one of the promoters of this doctrine of unconstitutional constitutional amendments doctrine. It's not something that I invented. In 40% of the countries in the world, there are certain things in the constitution that cannot be changed. Like in Germany, even if you have 100% of the legislators, you cannot undermine human dignity and the core pillars of the liberal democracy following against the backdrop of the Holocaust, obviously, and this exists in 40%. And in the other countries, it is true, like India, the court has developed the idea that certain core constitutional principles are so important to the constitutional order and to the constitutional identity that even a majority of the parliament cannot change it. And I argue that the same. Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. It has to remain a Jewish and democratic state. I have not authorized Simcha Rothman, although he is now sitting at the Israeli Constituent Assembly when he's at the Knesset. I have not authorized Simcha Rothman to decide that Israel is no longer a democracy, just like I have not authorized Simcha Rothman that Israel will no longer be a Jewish state. So there are certain core fundamental pillars that will last and should last, and they are beyond the powers of the Knesset to completely undermine them. That's the core argument, and I still hold it.
Okay, let's now respect our many viewers and try to answer with prompt responses some of the really dozens of questions that we received. I urge you to respond in a few sentences to each question so we can look at more than a few of them. So MK Rothman, what prevents, this is a question from Stephen Fangold, what prevents the government from enacting a law that provides the Jewish halacha is the law for all matters, or to evict all Arabs from the territories under your system?
I think that you can ask questions, what prevents the people who change the US Constitution or in a country without a constitution to include such provisions. You can always ask what prevents, and in some point you would say there is a limit to what the public will accept in any country. When you ask, you can ask it about the parliament in Israel. You can also ask it about the court. What prevents the courts today from giving this kind of verdict, saying that Arabs don't have a right to vote? What prevents them? The answer is nothing. Nothing today. If the court will make, what prevents the courts today from deciding that Netanyahu, even though he was elected by the public, he's not suitable to be a prime minister? What prevents them? The answer is nothing. What prevents the courts in Israel to decide that we should nuke the US? Nothing. What prevents them? You can ask this question. It's not a legitimate question because the answer is the public in Israel prevents them. The public in Israel does not want those kind of laws. That's why those kind of laws will never be. And that's the case in every democratic country. And the fact that you move the question from the legislator to the Constitution, just ask the question for the Constitution. What prevents the public in the US from changing the Constitution to include such terrible provisions? The answer, and in the US, you have a very robust constitution, so you can say they will never get that majority. I'm saying it about the Israeli parliament. They will never get that majority. But in many other countries, you can amend the constitution or can change the constitution with a referendum, with a regular referendum with 51%. What prevents them to add this kind of provisions to their constitution with a referendum? The answer is they don't want to.
Professor Rosner, a question from you from an anonymous attendee. There is no judicial check on the UK Parliament, and the House of Lords is not a real check. Your response?
Okay, but if I can just say a word about the previous, can I? All right. So just a word about that. In all other countries, when you want to change the constitution, there are certain strict mechanisms, either temporal limitations. So in Italy, you need to wait a few months between the readings, or special majority, supermajority, two-thirds majority, etc. All right, this is the normal situation. In Israel, in order to change basic laws, usually an ordinary majority is enough. So Simcha Rothman can enact basic law immigration in a simple day, in 1 day, sorry, in a simple majority. Okay, that's the idea. Now, this is not, again, you say, oh, but you should trust them for not making, bizarre changes quickly. Let me give you a real example. May 2018, our Knesset amended basic law of the government and the way by which the government can go to war, which is probably the most important constitutional rule that exists in a constitution. They amended it quickly, without any public deliberation. And you know how they change it? They change it so the person that can declare how to go to war is the prime minister, together in consultation with the minister of defense. What if it's the same person? What if it's one politician? So one politician can go to war. So they made it very quickly. And then afterwards, people told them, but it's unbelievable. How can you do such a thing? So 3 months later, they reversed that decision and again amended basic law of the government. But this is just to show you how quickly, how hastily and without considerations our politicians amend our basic laws. Now, why would we want to have such a system? I don't understand. Now, as for the UK, It is true that the UK, there is no strong judicial review style like the US. However, few distinctions. First, the UK, even after Brexit, are still members to the European Convention on Human Rights. So if I'm a UK citizen and my rights are being violated, I can take a train to Strasbourg, to the European Court of Human Rights against the UK in order to protect my rights. There are, again, 2 houses in Parliament, and you can make sure that you stop legislation for about a year if you want. There's a special committee in Parliament that makes sure the decisions are compatible, that laws, or bills are compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. There's a regional element in the elections. If I'm the representative of Bristol in Parliament, I consider other considerations, just considerations of my own party. In Israel, all political power is centered, again, with the coalition leadership. And most of our parties are actually totalitarian parties. So if this is the setting, we are certainly not like the UK. And one more point about the UK, to remind you, in the UK, there's a very deep and stable and long-standing tradition of democratic culture. If there was a few years ago in 2018, one of the ministers was late for Parliament, 2 minutes. He was late for 2 minutes. So he apologized and then he resigned. In Israel, even if you're indicted for corruption and breach of trust, you do not resign. So I don't think we can compare political culture in the UK to that of Israel, unfortunately.
We're almost out of time, so I skimmed through the 152 questions that we have on our list and picked the one that I deem most important, and this will be the last question for both of you. It's a question from Josh Tepp, and he asks, each side sees this as a zero-sum game. How do we focus on the middle ground? That's an important question, I believe. So, Professor Rosner, would you like to start, and then we'll let MK Rothman.
I would be happy to, and I'm grateful for this question, because I think that Israel can have a balanced and proper reform that would take away authorities of the judiciary to give more power to the political branches. We could have a balanced reform that would allow the parliament to have the final say, nonetheless still to protect fundamental rights and to protect basic values of the state. And I'm happy, even myself, 2 years ago, I published a book where I suggested a major reform. Now I'm happy to assist and to think about a balanced reform. But this is not the kind of reform that Simcha is now bringing to our door, unfortunately, and without any reason. Because if we just talk and think, we can have a good and balanced reform that would even get the approval of 85 Knesset members, or at least something equivalent in the public. So there is no real need to take us to the extreme.
MK Rothman, would you like to have a reform with 80, 85, 90 votes in the Knesset?
Of course I would like, but again, as Yaniv said before, that I'm taking measures that were never offered, and I showed him, I think I can show to anyone who asks, I am taking measures that are more gentle than measures that has been offered in the past by members of the opposition. And that's a tragedy, because the Justice Minister Levin and myself said all along, we're willing to talk, we're willing to negotiate with anyone who wants to negotiate. The problem is that Yair Lapid, the head of the opposition, said he does not want to negotiate. He has demands that he does not want to negotiate it. Even when the president, Herzog, offered and asked Shas and asked the Likud to postpone the legislation for a week as an act of goodwill, and the answer was yes. I have to say I was surprised for the goodwill that was offered by Shas and the Likud, because there was actually, I saw it coming, that this act of goodwill by the coalition was greeted with shouts of victory by Yair Lapid, saying, oh, you see the demonstration is working, let's go demonstrate some more, let's go incite some more. And then he said, okay, so now the president says, let's hold for a few days. We gave them a week. No, if we don't hold for 2 months, and stop the legislation totally. There will be no debates. I am more than willing to sit and negotiate with anyone who wants to negotiate. But I cannot agree to a situation that the majority of Israel chose one thing. We're trying to push it in a very responsible way, despite the lies, and despite the defamation, and despite the incitement. We offer a hand. I was in the opposition a year and a half ago. If someone from the coalition called me and said, "Let's negotiate," I would jump out of my skin for happiness. I was willing to go and negotiate, even though I thought it's a terrible, terrible coalition with terror supporters in it. And I went and I negotiated and I got to agreements. And I got to agreements on the law of citizenship. And I got more than 80 Knesset members to support a bill that I offered as a member of an opposition when the coalition opposition could not agree on anything. I'm a person for negotiation and agreements. But when the opposition does not want, I cannot negotiate with myself. I know my abilities of negotiation. I cannot negotiate with myself. Sorry?
Having been to the president's house today for some talks, are you more hopeful today about the possibility of some kind of compromise than you were yesterday?
Of course, I'm not talking about meetings that I have. That's not the way I do negotiations or politics at all. If anyone wants to meet with me publicly, then he meets with me publicly. If not, I'm not talking about it. But I'm saying, I know for a fact that there is a will in the coalition to negotiate and to get to a wider agreement. That demands leadership in the opposition, like the leadership Netanyahu offered when he was in the opposition. He was the one sending me to negotiate on behalf of 53 Knesset members when we were in the oppositions. There is no leadership in the opposition today. I really pray that there will be, because I think that to make change, it's better to do it with a wider agreements. It's better to do it with support of more people, but we will not get this ultimatum by people that are not responsible to the sake and the good future of the state of Israel and are trying to torch it down out of vengeance for the fact that they were not elected in the elections.
With that, I'd like to thank, you want to take it over, Elana and
Yes.
David?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank everyone.
Thank you so much to M.K. Rothman, Professor Rosner, for a fascinating, knowledgeable, and civil debate that I think was very needed. And hopefully we'll have some more down the road. I want to announce that we will have a transcript of the debate on jewishjournal.com and with our partner, the Tikvah Fund. Elana, you want to say a few words?
No, I just want to thank everybody for what was a really robust conversation. And I think ahead of next time, and following this time, what we might want to do is send out some short kind of cheat sheets organizing what the reforms are for people so that they can process everything that they've heard today with something a little more organized in front of them, giving them full information. And so in the follow-up, we'll, I guess, circulate my email and the Law Forum address, and over the course of the next couple of days, we'll fill in that information gap and look forward to more such events.
And we will continue to publish all kinds of commentaries on this hot subject on jewishjournal.com. Thank you again to all the panel.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shmuel.
Shalom.
Thank you, Elana. Thank you, Tikvah Fund.
Our pleasure.
Happy Sunday. Shavua Tov.
Shavua tov.